What happens when a desperate mother's worst nightmare collides with a billionaire's deepest regret? When Sarah rushes into a pharmacy with her dying baby, she has no idea the stranger who steps in to help will change everything. But Logan Matthews harbors dark secrets, and his powerful father will stop at nothing to destroy their growing bond. This is a story of love conquering manipulation, family defeating money, and second chances that transform lives forever. Let's begin. The automatic doors of Matthew's pharmacy hissed open, letting in a gust of December air that struck Sarah Bennett like a physical blow. She stumbled inside, her 18-month-old son Tommy burning against her chest like a small furnace. His fever had reached 104.2 degrees an hour ago, and the emergency room at Brooklyn General had turned them away with cold efficiency. No insurance means no treatment, the triage nurse had said, not even looking up from her clipboard. Try the free clinic on 5th Street. They open at 8 Monday morning. It was Friday night. Monday might as well have been next year. Sarah's waitress uniform, a white shirt yellowed from too many washes and black pants that had seen better decades, clung to her trembling body. She hadn't slept in 48 hours. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises, and her hands shook as she approached the pharmacy counter. Behind the glass partition, a young pharmacist named Kevin Miller looked up from his computer screen, his face immediately showing the uncomfortable recognition of someone about to deliver bad news. "I need amoxicillin," Sarah said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and desperation. "The liquid suspension for children. Please. He's burning up, and I don't know what else to do." Kevin glanced at Tommy's flushed face, noting the way the toddler's small body shuddered with chills, the glassy look in his half-closed eyes, the desperation written across Sarah's features. His pharmacy training warred with his basic human compassion, and unfortunately, corporate policy won. "Ma'am, I need a prescription and payment up front." "Store policy." "I'm sorry, but I could lose my job if—" "Look at him." Sarah's voice rose, drawing stares from other customers browsing the vitamin aisles. "He's sick. Really sick. I get paid Tuesday. I can bring you the money then. I'll leave my ID, my phone, anything you want as collateral. Please, I'm begging you." Kevin shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the security cameras mounted in every corner. The store had strict corporate policies, regular inspections, and a district manager who fired people for policy violations without hesitation. He'd seen it happen to colleagues who bent the rules for sob stories that turned out to be scams. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. You're causing a disturbance, and I really wish I could help, but..." "But what?" "But you'd rather watch a baby suffer than bend a rule?" "But corporate profits matter more than a child's life." Sarah felt the world closing in around her like a vice. This was it, the moment every single mother dreaded, the moment that haunted her nightmares. The moment when love wasn't enough, when desperation met bureaucracy and lost, when the system designed to help people revealed its true face of indifference and cruelty. She turned toward the door, tears streaming down her face, Tommy's labored breathing the only sound she could hear above the roaring in her ears. That's when a voice cut through the air like a blade through silk. "What's going on here?" The voice belonged to a man who commanded attention without asking for it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything in seconds and find it wanting. His charcoal wool coat was tailored to perfection, his shoes Italian leather that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, his presence magnetic in the way that only true power and confidence could create. This was Logan Matthews, heir to the Matthews pharmaceutical empire and worth more money than Sarah could imagine, though she didn't know it yet. "Nothing, sir," Sarah said quickly, instinctively stepping back and lowering her eyes the way she'd learned to do around authority figures. "I was just leaving. I'm sorry for the disturbance." But those gray eyes weren't looking at her with judgment or dismissal. They were fixed on Tommy's flushed face, studying the rapid rise and fall of his tiny chest, the way his small hands clutched weakly at Sarah's shirt, the telltale signs of a child in serious medical distress. Logan had seen sick children before, had held one as he died in his arms, and recognition flashed across his features like lightning. "How long has he been like this?" Logan asked, stepping closer with the kind of focused intensity that made everything else in the room fade into background noise. 3 days. The fever won't break no matter what I do, and he's barely eating. He threw up everything I tried to give him this morning. The hospital said they couldn't help without insurance, and the free clinic won't open until Monday, and I don't think he can wait that long. The hospital turned you away. It wasn't a question. Logan's jaw tightened as he processed the implications, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Kevin, give her the medication." "Now." "Mr. Matthews, sir, she doesn't have a prescription or payment, and corporate policy clearly states." "I don't care what corporate policy states. I don't care about prescriptions or payments or any other bureaucratic bullshit. That child needs antibiotics, and we're going to provide them." Logan pulled out his phone with decisive movements, his fingers flying over the screen. "Dr. Peterson? Logan Matthews. I need you at my downtown location immediately. Pediatric emergency, high fever, possible pneumonia. Money is no object, and I need you here in the next 20 minutes. Sarah stared at him in complete shock, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Strangers didn't do this. Rich men in expensive coats didn't swoop in to save broke single mothers and their sick children. There had to be a catch, an angle, something he wanted in return. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You don't even know us. You don't owe us anything." Logan's expression softened as he looked at Tommy, but something raw and painful flickered behind his eyes, a ghost of old grief that never quite faded. "Because I know what it's like to lose a child," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of tragedy. "And I won't let it happen again. Not when I can stop it." 3 years earlier, Logan Matthews had been driving through the intersection of 5th and Madison on a rainy Thursday evening when the drunk driver ran the red light. The impact had been devastating, metal crushing metal with the sound of thunder, glass exploding like deadly confetti, the sudden silence that followed broken only by a child's cry that would haunt Logan's dreams for the rest of his life. Logan had survived with minor cuts, a concussion, and the kind of survivor's guilt that ate away at a person's soul one sleepless night at a time. His 3-year-old nephew Jamie hadn't been so lucky. The little boy who'd called him Uncle Lo and insisted on wearing Superman pajamas to every family gathering had died in Logan's arms while they waited for paramedics who arrived too late to matter. The funeral had been a media circus that perfectly captured everything wrong with Logan's world. The Matthews family was New York royalty, their pharmaceutical empire worth billions, their personal tragedies fodder for tabloid headlines and society page speculation. Logan had stood at the graveside in his perfectly tailored black suit, accepting condolences from people who calculated his net worth while expressing their sympathy, while his sister Emma sobbed inconsolably beside him. "You were supposed to protect him," Emma had whispered that night in the hospital waiting room, her voice hollow with the kind of loss that changed people forever. "I trusted you with my baby, and you killed him. You killed my son." The words had shattered something inside Logan that 3 years of therapy and charitable work had never quite managed to repair. His father, Richard Matthews, had been more pragmatic in his cruelty, viewing tragedy as just another business problem to be managed and contained. "Accidents happen," Richard had said during the reading of the will that made Logan heir to everything, his voice carrying the emotional warmth of a board meeting. "What matters now is the family business, the legacy we're building. You can't bring the boy back, but you can honor his memory by fulfilling your responsibilities to this family." But Logan couldn't build anything meaningful on the grave of an innocent child. He'd thrown himself into work with the desperation of a man trying to outrun his own conscience, expanding the pharmaceutical empire, increasing profits, meeting every expectation his father set, except the one that mattered most. He couldn't forgive himself for that moment of inattention, that split second when he looked away from the road to answer Jamie's question about whether Superman could really fly. More importantly, he couldn't figure out how to live with the weight of a life cut short because of his momentary carelessness. Therapy had helped some. Dr. Martinez had taught him coping mechanisms, helped him understand that survivor's guilt was normal and natural, that trauma responses were part of the human condition. But understanding and healing were different things entirely. Logan functioned, succeeded, even thrived in the business world, but he felt hollow inside, like a man going through the motions of a life that belonged to someone else. The charitable work had started small. Anonymous donations to children's hospitals, scholarships for underprivileged kids, funding for medical research. But nothing felt like enough. Nothing balanced the scales or quieted the voice in his head that whispered he didn't deserve happiness when Jamie would never grow up to experience his own. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of sleepless nights, therapy sessions that helped but didn't heal, and a growing certainty that he'd never deserve love or family again. Until today. Until Sarah and Tommy showed him that sometimes redemption came disguised as someone else's crisis. As Dr. Peterson examined the feverish toddler in the pharmacy's back room, a space Logan had converted into a makeshift medical facility, Logan watched Sarah's face cycle through emotions like weather patterns. Relief that help had finally arrived, confusion about why a stranger would go to such lengths, suspicion about hidden motives and eventual bills, and overwhelming gratitude that made her eyes shine with unshed tears. Bacterial pneumonia, Dr. Peterson announced after a thorough examination, his weathered hands gentle as he checked Tommy's breathing and heart rate. Caught early enough to treat with oral antibiotics, but you were absolutely right to be concerned. His fever was approaching dangerous levels, and another 12 hours could have meant hospitalization or worse. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief, and Logan found himself reaching out to steady her without thinking. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, not just attraction, though he couldn't deny she was beautiful despite her exhaustion, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The sense of meeting someone who understood struggle in ways his usual social circle never could. "Is he going to be okay?" Sarah asked, her voice small and scared in a way that made Logan want to promise her things he had no right to guarantee. With proper treatment and rest, absolutely. But he'll need monitoring for the next few days, and any worsening of symptoms would require immediate medical attention. I'll want to see him again in 48 hours to check his progress. After Dr. Peterson left with a promise to check on Tommy personally and instructions for around-the-clock care, Sarah turned to Logan with tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know your name, and you've saved his life. Logan Matthews. And you don't need to thank me." He studied her face, taking in the exhaustion lines around eyes too young to look so tired, the determined set of her jaw that spoke of someone who'd learned to fight for everything she had. "What's your name?" "Sarah Bennett." "This is Tommy." She adjusted the sleeping baby in her arms, his breathing finally steady and peaceful for the first time in days. "Where's Tommy's father?" The question hit like a slap, and Sarah's expression immediately hardened with the defensive posture of someone who'd answered it too many times before. "Gone. Has been since I told him I was pregnant." He made it very clear that fatherhood wasn't part of his life plan. Logan felt anger flare in his chest, not at her, but at the kind of man who could walk away from responsibility, who could abandon a woman and child without a second thought. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." "I'm used to handling things alone," Sarah said with the kind of fierce independence that came from having no other choice. "Tommy and I do just fine on our own." "Maybe you don't have to anymore," Logan said softly, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. The next evening found Logan Matthews in the last place anyone who knew him would expect to see him. Murphy's Diner in Brooklyn, a greasy spoon where the coffee was bitter, the dreams came to die, and the customers paid in crumpled bills and loose change. He sat at the counter, completely out of place in his $1,000 suit among the truckers, night shift workers, and people scraping by on the margins of society. He watched Sarah navigate between tables with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and purposeful despite the obvious exhaustion that seemed to be her permanent state. She carried herself with a dignity that expensive clothing couldn't buy, treating every customer with the same professional courtesy, whether they left a dollar tip or stiffed her entirely. During her break, she approached him with suspicious curiosity, her server's aprons stained with coffee and whatever passed for today's special. "What are you doing here?" she asked, refilling his coffee cup without being asked, noting how surreal it was to see someone so obviously wealthy in a place where luxury meant getting your eggs over easy instead of scrambled. "Checking on Tommy. How's he feeling?" "Better. Much better, thanks to you." Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, studying his face for signs of ulterior motives. "But you could have called. You didn't need to come all the way down here to slum it with the working class." Logan took a sip of the genuinely terrible coffee and smiled, finding something refreshing about a place that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. "Actually, I did need to come here. I wanted to ask you something." He paused, seeming to gather courage in a way that surprised her. Men like him didn't usually hesitate about anything. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere nice, just the two of us. I can arrange for a babysitter if..." Sarah nearly dropped the coffee pot, the suggestion so unexpected that she wondered if she'd misheard. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she'd learned to be suspicious of gifts that seemed too good to be true. "I'm a single mother working 2 jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. You're obviously wealthy, successful, probably used to dating supermodels and socialites who wear designer everything and never have to check their bank balance before buying groceries. What could you possibly want with someone like me?" Logan's expression grew serious, and for a moment she saw past the expensive clothes and confident demeanor to something more vulnerable underneath. "Maybe I'm tired of people who only see dollar signs when they look at me. Maybe I want to be around someone real for a change, someone who fights for what matters instead of what's profitable." Sarah studied his face with the analytical skills she'd developed during years of reading people's intentions, looking for the lie, the hidden agenda, the inevitable disappointment that came with trusting people above her station. But all she saw was sincerity, and something else that made her heart skip unexpectedly: loneliness. The kind that came from having everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. "One dinner," she said finally, setting down the coffee pot with more force than necessary. "But I choose the place, and if this is some kind of rich guy fantasy about sleeping with the help, you can forget it right now." Logan's smile was genuine and reached his eyes. "Deal. And for what it's worth, I'm not looking for a fantasy. I'm looking for something real." What Sarah didn't know was that Logan had spent the entire day having her investigated by the best private detective money could hire. Not because he suspected her of anything criminal, but because he'd learned the hard way that information was power, and he needed to understand what he was getting into before his heart got any more involved. The report from Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who now specialized in background checks for high-profile clients, painted a picture of a woman who'd survived impossible odds through sheer determination and an unbreakable will. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett, age 24. Born to drug-addicted parents in a rundown section of Albany, who lost custody when she was 7 after a neighbor reported finding her caring for herself and scrounging for food while her parents were unconscious from their latest high. The next 11 years had been a nightmare tour of the foster care system. 12 different homes, 3 failed adoptions that fell through when families decided she was too damaged or too much trouble, and countless social workers who saw her as a case number rather than a human being with feelings and dreams. The details made Logan's chest tight with anger. Homes where she'd been treated as free labor, families who took in foster children for the monthly payments while providing minimal care, and at least 2 situations where she'd been removed due to inappropriate behavior by adult males in the household. A euphemism that made Logan want to track down those men and introduce them to his fists. She'd aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma earned despite constant disruption, an acceptance letter to community college she couldn't afford, and a determination to build something better for herself. Working nights at a diner and weekends catering wealthy events where she was invisible to the guests, she'd managed to pay for classes 1 semester at a time, sleeping 4 hours a night and living on ramen noodles and pure willpower. When she'd gotten pregnant during her final year, everyone, counselors, social workers, even some professors, had expected her to drop out and accept a life of minimum wage jobs and government assistance. Instead, she doubled down, working more hours, sleeping less, and graduating summa cum laude with an associate's degree in business administration while caring for a newborn alone. She'd been offered a full scholarship to continue her bachelor's degree at NYU, but Tommy's medical expenses and the reality of childcare costs had made it impossible to take advantage of the opportunity. Instead, she'd taken a job waitressing at Murphy's Diner and picked up extra shifts catering high-end events, determined to provide for her son without relying on anyone else. The most interesting detail was about Tommy's father, Daniel Morrison, son of a wealthy Connecticut family who'd met Sarah at a college party and pursued her with the kind of charm that wealthy boys learned in prep school. When she'd told him about the pregnancy, he'd offered to pay for an abortion and disappeared when she refused. The Morrison family had later sent a lawyer with a substantial check and a non-disclosure agreement, money Sarah had reluctantly accepted to pay for Tommy's delivery and first few months of expenses. But there was something else in the report that made Logan's blood run cold. Daniel Morrison was currently being represented by Blackwood and Associates, the same law firm his father Richard Matthews used for all sensitive family matters. The connection couldn't be coincidental, which meant his father was somehow involved in Sarah's life. And when Richard Matthews took an interest in someone, it was never for benevolent reasons. Sarah chose Tony's Pizza, a hole-in-the-wall joint in Little Italy, where she'd worked briefly after Tommy was born, and the owner still treated her like family. Giuseppe Corelli was a 70-year-old Sicilian immigrant who'd built his restaurant through 40 years of 18-hour days and treated his employees like the children he'd never had. When Sarah walked in with Logan, Giuseppe's reaction was immediate and protective. "This is the rich boy?" he asked in his thick Brooklyn accent, looking Logan up and down like he was appraising livestock for market. "He doesn't look like much. Too clean. Hands too soft." "Giuseppe," Sarah warned, mortified but not entirely surprised by the interrogation. "It's fine," Logan said, extending his hand with genuine warmth and meeting Giuseppe's suspicious gaze directly. "I'm Logan. And you're right. I do have soft hands and more money than I probably deserve. But I'm hoping that's not all Sarah sees in me." Giuseppe studied Logan's face for a long moment, his weathered features serious as he searched for insincerity, condescension, or the casual cruelty that often accompanied wealth and privilege. Finding none, he broke into a wide grin that transformed his entire face. "I like him already," he declared, clapping Logan on the back with enough force to stagger a smaller man. "Sarah, you keep this one. But if he hurts you, I know people who make problems disappear, capice?" Over pizza that was genuinely excellent and cheap Chianti that tasted better than wines that cost 10 times as much, Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Logan was funny in a self-deprecating way that suggested real humility, genuinely interested in her thoughts on everything from books to movies to her dreams for Tommy's future, and refreshingly free of the condescending attitude she'd expected from someone of his obvious wealth and status. "What about you?" she asked as they shared a piece of tiramisu that Giuseppe had insisted was on the house for Sarah's friend. What do you want? And don't give me some generic answer about helping people or making the world better. What do you really want? Logan was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Honestly, I want to matter to someone. Not because of what I can buy them or what I can do for them or how I can advance their social status, but just because I'm me. Because they choose me, not my bank account or my family name or my connections. You matter to Tommy, Sarah said softly, remembering how her son had smiled at Logan during his examination, reaching for him with the instinctive trust that children showed to people who genuinely cared about them. He smiled at you today when you picked him up. Really smiled, not just gas or politeness. He doesn't do that with strangers. What about you? Logan asked, his voice dropping to just above a whisper, his gray eyes intense in the flickering candlelight. Do I matter to you? Sarah felt her heart skip a beat, awareness crackling between them like electricity. This was dangerous territory, falling for a man so far out of her league that it defied logic and common sense. But looking into his eyes, she saw the same loneliness she'd carried for so long, the same hunger for genuine connection that money couldn't buy. Yeah, she admitted, her voice barely audible. You do. Over the next 3 weeks, Logan became a constant presence in Sarah and Tommy's lives, but he was careful not to overwhelm them or make Sarah feel like charity case. He was respectful of boundaries, patient with her occasional moments of panic when reality reminded her how different their worlds were, and surprisingly natural with Tommy despite having no experience with children since Jamie's death. He arranged for Tommy to see the best pediatric specialists in the city, ensuring his complete recovery from the pneumonia and establishing ongoing care with a family doctor who would see them regardless of insurance status. When Sarah protested that she couldn't afford such expensive medical care, Logan had quietly set up a foundation account that covered all of Tommy's healthcare needs without making her feel like a burden. He helped her find a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, not a penthouse or mansion that would have made her uncomfortable, but a clean 2-bedroom with good schools nearby, a playground across the street, and rent that was only slightly more than what she'd been paying for her previous cramped studio. When she questioned how she could afford it, he explained that the building owner owed him a favor, which was technically true even if the favor involved Logan buying the building specifically to provide affordable housing for working families. Most importantly, he was present in the small, daily ways that mattered most. He showed up for bedtime stories, bringing children's books that quickly became Tommy's favorites. He helped with midnight feedings when Tommy had nightmares or wasn't feeling well, never complaining about lost sleep or the disruption to his schedule. He spent Saturday mornings at the park, pushing Tommy on swings and building sandcastles while Sarah studied for the LSATs. An exam she'd decided to take after Logan's example inspired her to pursue law school with the goal of helping other families navigate the system that had failed her so often. You don't have to do all this, Sarah said one evening as Logan patiently assembled a complicated toy kitchen Tommy had received for his 2nd birthday. The expensive gifts, the tutoring money, the medical care. We were doing fine before we met you. I know you were, Logan replied, carefully attaching tiny cabinet doors while Tommy helped by handing him screws and babbling instructions in his own private language. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Sarah. But strong doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. I'm scared, she admitted, settling onto the floor beside them and watching Logan's careful attention to even the smallest details of the toy. People don't usually help without expecting something in return. And men like you don't usually stay with women like me. Logan stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully, his expression serious. What kind of woman are you? Poor. Uneducated despite my degree. Damaged goods with a kid and no family to speak of. The kind of woman rich men have fun with but don't take home to meet their parents. You want to know what kind of woman I see? Logan's voice was fierce with conviction, his gray eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. I see someone who worked 3 jobs while earning a college degree and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Someone who chose to raise her child alone rather than compromise her values or settle for less than she deserved. Someone who fights for what matters and never gives up, even when the whole world seems stacked against her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the description, seeing herself through his eyes for the first time in years. I see the woman I'm falling in love with, he continued, reaching for her hands and holding them gently. And if you think I'm going anywhere, you don't know me very well yet. Their happiness lasted exactly 23 days. Sarah was giving Tommy his morning bottle and watching him play with the educational blocks Logan had brought when the knock came, sharp, authoritative, and somehow official in a way that made her blood pressure spike immediately. She opened the door to find Daniel Morrison standing in her hallway, looking older and more polished than she remembered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Behind him stood a woman in an equally expensive outfit carrying a briefcase that screamed lawyer. "Hello, Sarah," Daniel said with the same charming smile that had fooled her 2 years ago, though now she could see the calculation behind it. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Sarah replied, moving to close the door. Tommy was in his high chair behind her, happily smearing banana all over his face, and she didn't want Daniel anywhere near him. "Actually, there is." Daniel held up a legal document with official seals and formal language that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. "I'm petitioning for full custody of my son." The world tilted sideways, and Sarah had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. "Your son? You mean the son you wanted me to abort? The son you've never even met? The son you told me was a mistake that would ruin your life?" "I was young and scared," Daniel said smoothly, his prepared speech rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "I've grown up since then. I'm financially stable now, engaged to a wonderful woman who's eager to be a mother. I can provide for him in ways you never could, private schools, the best healthcare, opportunities you could never give him on a waitress's salary." The woman beside him smiled with practiced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Jennifer Walsh," she said, extending a manicured hand that Sarah ignored. "I'm so looking forward to being Tommy's stepmother. We have such wonderful plans for his future." "Get out," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking with rage, so pure it felt like being struck by lightning. "Get out now, or I'm calling the police." "We'll see you in court, Sarah," Daniel said, his smile turning cold and predatory. "And I'll win. You're a broke single mother with no family, no resources, and no real future to offer a child. What judge wouldn't want to give a boy the chance at a better life?" After they left, Sarah sank to the floor and sobbed with the kind of despair that came from watching your worst nightmare walk up to your door and announce itself. She'd known this happiness was too good to last. She'd known someone would come to take it all away. In the foster system, she'd learned that good things were temporary, that people left, that love was conditional on convenience and circumstance. When Logan arrived that evening, as he did every evening now, like clockwork, he found her sitting in the dark, staring at the custody papers like they were a death sentence written in legal language she barely understood. "He wants Tommy," she said without looking up, her voice hollow with defeat. "Daniel. He showed up today with lawyers and papers and a whole plan for taking my son away from me. And he's right, I can't fight him. I have nothing." Logan knelt beside her chair, taking the papers from her trembling hands. As he read, his expression grew darker and darker, his jaw clenching with barely controlled fury. When he reached the signature page and saw the law firm's name, he understood exactly what was happening. "Sarah," he said carefully, his voice tight with controlled rage, "do you know who Daniel's lawyer is?" She shook her head, too devastated to care about details. "James Blackwood of Blackwood and Associates. He's been my father's personal attorney for 20 years, and he doesn't take cases unless Richard Matthews personally approves them." Logan's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of calm that preceded volcanic eruptions. This isn't about Tommy, and it's not about Daniel suddenly developing paternal instincts. This is about me. Richard Matthews had built his pharmaceutical empire on one simple principle that had served him well for over 30 years: control through information and leverage. He knew everyone's secrets, everyone's weaknesses, everyone's pressure points. When his wife died of cancer 10 years earlier, that need for control had become an obsession that extended to every aspect of his children's lives: their careers, their relationships, their choices, their futures. Logan had been the perfect heir until Jamie's death. The guilt and grief had changed him fundamentally, made him question everything his father stood for, everything the Matthews legacy represented. When Logan started the charity work, the free clinics, the scholarships for underprivileged children, Richard saw it as weakness and betrayal of everything the family had built. The final break had come when Logan refused to marry Victoria Ashford, daughter of a political dynasty and Richard's carefully chosen selection for a daughter-in-law. The merger would have combined two of the most powerful families in America, creating an unstoppable business and political machine that could influence everything from pharmaceutical regulations to healthcare policy. Instead, Logan had walked away from the family business, started his own pharmaceutical company focused on affordable medications rather than maximum profits, and cut all ties with his father. For 3 years, Richard had been waiting for the right leverage to bring his prodigal son home. Sarah Bennett and her vulnerable situation were exactly the leverage he needed. "You think you understand what you're dealing with," Logan said as he made a series of phone calls from his penthouse that night, his voice cold with the kind of fury that came from finally understanding your enemy's strategy. "But my father doesn't just want to win. He wants to destroy everything I care about so completely that I'll have no choice but to come crawling back and beg for his forgiveness." His first call was to Catherine Reynolds, the best family law attorney in New York and someone who'd never lost a case involving children. His second was to Marcus Webb, expanding the investigation into Daniel Morrison and his sudden convenient interest in fatherhood. His third was to his accountant, liquidating assets to fund what would certainly be an expensive legal battle against opponents with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. If his father wanted war, Logan would give him one. But this time, he was fighting for something that actually mattered. The custody hearing was set for 6 weeks away, barely enough time to build a defense against an opponent who'd been planning this attack for months and had unlimited resources to throw at the problem. Catherine Reynolds didn't sugarcoat their situation during their first strategy meeting in her downtown law office. "Daniel has several significant advantages," she explained, spreading files across her polished conference table like a general planning a military campaign. Financial stability, a 2-parent household with his fiancée, family connections that open doors, and a legal team that's been preparing this case for longer than we've known it existed. But he also has weaknesses we can exploit: the abandonment, the payoff money to keep you quiet, the complete lack of interest in Tommy until now. "What are our realistic chances?" Sarah asked, her voice barely steady as she tried to process the legal terminology and strategic considerations that would determine her son's future. "Honestly, 40-60 against us, maybe worse depending on which judge we get assigned. Family court tends to favor financial stability and 2-parent homes, even when the motivation is questionable." Catherine looked at Logan meaningfully. However, a married couple with demonstrated financial stability and genuine affection for the child changes the equation significantly. The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic outside and the grandfather clock in the corner marking time with mechanical precision. Logan and Sarah stared at each other, the weight of the suggestion hanging between them like a live wire. "That's not why I'm with her," Logan said finally, his voice firm but defensive. "I know that and you know that, but the court doesn't know that. They'll see a stable family unit with resources versus a single mother and a deadbeat father who's suddenly interested in his son. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's reality." That night, Logan and Sarah walked through Central Park in silence, both lost in thought as they pushed Tommy's stroller along paths lit by old-fashioned street lamps. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. Tommy slept peacefully in his stroller, unaware that his entire future hung in the balance of adult decisions and legal maneuvering. "Would you do it?" Sarah asked suddenly, stopping beside the reservoir where moonlight turned the water into liquid silver. "Marry me, I mean." For Tommy, for the court case. Logan turned to face her, his hands reaching up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Sarah, if I marry you, it won't be for Tommy. It won't be for the court case or the legal advantages or to win some battle against my father. It'll be because I'm in love with you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that caught the moonlight like diamonds. "Logan, I love how you fight for your son without ever giving up hope, even when everything seems impossible. I love how you see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it and haven't earned it. I love your strength, your intelligence, your courage in the face of overwhelming odds." His voice broke slightly with emotion. "I love you, Sarah. Not what you represent, not what you might become, not the idea of you, but you exactly as you are right now." "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with tears and wonder. "But this is crazy. We've known each other for less than 2 months. People don't fall in love this fast. Not really. Then we'll have the rest of our lives to figure out if what we're feeling is real." Logan dropped to one knee right there on the park path, pulling out a ring box he'd been carrying for a week, waiting for the right moment. "Sarah Elizabeth Bennett, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and Tommy for the rest of my life? Will you build a family with me? Will you trust me to never let you down?" Through her tears, Sarah could only nod, too overwhelmed with emotion to form words. Richard Matthews was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully or tolerated defiance from his own family. When his network of informants and paid sources reported Logan's engagement, he immediately escalated his strategy from manipulation to total warfare. If he couldn't force Logan home through simple emotional blackmail, he'd destroy everything Logan cared about and rebuild from the ashes. The first attack came through the media, swift and brutal and perfectly coordinated. Multiple someones actually, leaked the story of Logan's hasty engagement to every tabloid, gossip blog, and society columnist in the city. The headlines were designed for maximum damage. Pharmacy Prince falls for poverty ploy, from broke to billionaire, the ultimate baby trap, and Matthews' heir's midlife crisis goes public. The stories painted Sarah as a calculating gold digger who'd trapped a grieving billionaire with a sick child and a sob story. They dug up her foster care history and twisted it into evidence of instability and poor judgment. They found former classmates willing to speculate about her character and motivations, always with the disclaimer that they just wanted Logan to be happy, while implying he was being manipulated. Paparazzi appeared outside Sarah's workplace, her apartment building, even Tommy's daycare center. The photos were deliberately unflattering. Sarah looking exhausted after a double shift, Logan seeming uncomfortable as reporters shouted invasive questions, Tommy crying as camera flashes went off around his stroller like strobe lights. The second attack was more personal and potentially more damaging. Daniel Morrison suddenly had unlimited resources for his custody battle, private investigators digging into every aspect of Sarah's past, character witnesses ready to testify about Logan's unstable mental state following his nephew's death, expert witnesses prepared to argue that a child's welfare shouldn't depend on his mother's romantic choices or financial desperation. But Richard's most devastating move was still to come, and it would change everything they thought they knew about the situation. Logan and Sarah were married in a simple ceremony at City Hall on a gray Tuesday morning that threatened snow. Catherine Reynolds and Giuseppe served as witnesses, while Tommy gurgled happily in Logan's arms throughout the brief proceedings, occasionally clapping his hands or babbling commentary that made everyone smile despite the serious circumstances. Sarah wore a simple white dress Logan had chosen for her, not because she couldn't afford her own, but because he'd wanted to give her something beautiful for their wedding day. They exchanged rings that had belonged to Logan's mother, simple gold bands that carried more meaning than the most expensive diamonds. "I promise to love you," Logan said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, "to protect you and Tommy, to be the husband and father you both deserve, and to never give you reason to doubt my commitment to this family we're building together." "I promise to trust you," Sarah replied, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes, "to believe in us even when everything seems impossible, to support your dreams while pursuing my own, and to love you not for what you can give us, but for who you are." It wasn't the wedding either of them had dreamed of as children. No cathedral, no hundreds of guests, no reception that lasted until dawn. But it was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity, witnessed by people who genuinely cared about their happiness rather than their social status. The happiness lasted exactly 4 hours. They were having their reception dinner at Giuseppe's restaurant, just the 5 of them plus Catherine, sharing pizza and cheap champagne while Tommy played with his new toy truck, when Logan's phone rang. It was Marcus Webb, and his voice carried the kind of urgency that made Logan's blood run cold. "Logan, we have a major problem. I've been digging into Daniel Morrison's background like you asked, and I found something that changes everything. He's not Tommy's father." Logan nearly dropped his phone, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "DNA test, conducted privately 8 months ago. Morrison had doubts about paternity and hired his own investigator to look into it. The results are conclusive. No paternal match whatsoever. He's known for months that Tommy isn't his biological son." "Then who?" Logan looked at Sarah, who had gone completely white as she realized what the conversation was about. "That's where it gets interesting and complicated," Marcus continued. "The timing suggests Tommy's father is someone Sarah met during a catering job she worked the summer before she got pregnant. Big society wedding in the Hamptons. I'm sending you the details now, but Logan, you're not going to like what I found." Logan looked at the information on his phone and felt the world shift beneath him like an earthquake. The Ashford Sterling wedding. You know it. Victoria Ashford was the woman my father wanted me to marry. Her sister Caroline married Marcus Sterling, son of Sterling Financial Group and my father's godson. Richard Matthews was at that wedding. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Sarah had been working the catering crew at that wedding, invisible to the wealthy guests who saw servers as furniture to be ignored. And somehow, one of those guests had become Tommy's father, someone connected to Logan's family, someone whose identity Richard Matthews had discovered and was now using as leverage. "Sarah," Logan said carefully, his voice tight with dread, "we need to talk about that catering job. About the Ashford Sterling wedding. I need to know exactly what happened that night." The story came out in Sarah's apartment that night, told in broken whispers and tears that had been held back for too long. She'd been working the Ashford Sterling wedding to pay for her final semester of community college, the biggest, most exclusive catering event she'd ever worked, with hundreds of guests, unlimited champagne, and enough money from tips to cover her textbooks and living expenses for months. The wedding had been a fairy tale affair at a private estate in the Hamptons, with gardens that looked like something from a movie and guests who wore more money and jewelry than most people made in a year. Sarah had been part of the serving staff, invisible in her black uniform, moving through crowds of people who never really saw her. Marcus Sterling, the groom's younger brother, had been different. 24 years old, devastatingly handsome, and heir to a financial empire, he'd noticed her in a way that made 19-year-old Sarah feel special and important. He'd flirted with her during her breaks, complimented her smile, told her she was too beautiful to be working instead of dancing with the other guests. He'd been charming in the way that wealthy men learned in prep schools and Ivy League colleges, smooth, confident, knowing exactly what to say to make a working-class girl feel like Cinderella at the ball. When he'd invited her to walk with him in the gardens after the reception, she'd thought it was romantic. When he'd kissed her under the stars, she'd thought it meant something real. "I was so stupid," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with shame that still felt fresh after all this time. "I actually thought he cared about me. I thought what happened between us meant something to him the way it meant something to me." When he'd invited her to his guest cottage on the estate, she'd gone willingly, believing in fairy tales and the possibility that love could bridge the gap between their different worlds. She'd been naive enough to believe that a wealthy man could genuinely care about a catering server, that their connection was real and meaningful, rather than just convenient entertainment. The truth had become brutally clear the next morning when she'd woken up alone with $500 on the nightstand and a note that read, "Thanks for a great night. Buy yourself something nice." I felt like such a fool," Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face as Logan held her. "Like the cheapest kind of cliché. The poor girl who thought she was special to the rich boy, when really she was just another conquest to him." "I never told him about Tommy," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was too humiliated to contact him, too ashamed to admit what had happened. And then when I met Daniel a few months later and he assumed Tommy was his, I let him believe it. It was easier than explaining the truth, easier than admitting I'd been stupid enough to fall for Marcus Sterling's lies." Logan held her as she sobbed, his mind racing through implications and connections that made his blood burn with rage. Marcus Sterling was Richard Matthews' godson, practically family. The connection couldn't be coincidental, which meant his father had known the truth about Tommy's paternity from the beginning and had been orchestrating this entire situation. "Does my father know?" Logan asked Marcus Webb when he called back. "I'm still investigating, but given the timeline, the parties involved, and the resources being thrown at this custody case, I'd say it's highly likely." "Logan, there's something else you need to know. Morrison isn't backing down from the custody case, even though he knows Tommy isn't his son. Someone's paying him substantial money to continue the charade, and the payments are coming from accounts connected to your father's business interests." The trap had been perfectly laid and brilliantly executed. Richard Matthews had orchestrated the entire situation: the fake custody battle, the media attention, the pressure on Logan to come home and clean up the family scandal. It was manipulation on a level that demonstrated just how far his father would go to maintain control over his children's lives. But Logan had underestimated his father's ruthlessness and willingness to destroy innocent people in pursuit of his goals. The worst was yet to come. 2 days before the custody hearing, Catherine Reynolds called with devastating news that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. "They've filed additional evidence," she said, her voice grim with professional concern and personal anger. "Someone provided them with sealed therapy records from after your nephew's accident, Logan. They're arguing that your guilt and trauma make you an unstable influence on Tommy." "That's insane," Sarah said, pacing their living room while Tommy played with blocks, completely unaware of the adult drama swirling around him. "Logan would never hurt Tommy. He loves him more than anything." "I know that. You know that. But grief and trauma can be powerful weapons in court when they're presented the right way. They're painting a picture of a man so desperate to replace the child he lost that he'll cling to any substitute, regardless of the consequences to that child's psychological well-being." Logan felt the old familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was using Tommy to fill the void Jamie had left. Maybe his love for Sarah and her son was just another form of selfishness, another way of making himself feel better about his failures as a protector and guardian. "There's more," Catherine continued, her voice heavy with bad news. "They've subpoenaed your medical records from after the accident, your prescription history for antidepressants and sleep aids, even testimony from your former therapist about your suicidal ideation in the months following Jamie's death. They're building a comprehensive case that you're emotionally unfit to be around children. The attacks felt personal because they were personal. Richard Matthews had access to Logan's most private struggles, his darkest moments, his most vulnerable admissions made in confidence to medical professionals. The violation was almost worse than the legal threat. That night, Logan stood on his penthouse balcony, staring out at the city lights that blurred and shifted like tears through his vision. Sarah found him there an hour later, still in the same position, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles had gone white with strain. "Talk to me," she said softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind and feeling the tension in his muscles. "What if they're right?" Logan's voice was barely audible above the wind and traffic noise. "What if I am just trying to replace Jamie? What if I'm not good for Tommy for you? What if I'm so damaged by what happened that I'll end up hurting the people I love most?" Sarah moved to stand beside him, her hand covering his on the railing, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "Do you know what Tommy did today while you were at work?" Logan shook his head, unable to look at her. He crawled to the door and sat there for 20 minutes, just waiting and watching. When I asked him what he was doing, he pointed at the door and said, "Dada home soon." Not just Dada home soon. Because that's what you are to him, Logan. You're not a replacement for anyone. You're home. Your safety. Your love. Logan's composure finally cracked completely. The tears he'd held back for 3 years came flooding out, for Jamie, for the family he'd lost, for the fear of losing another child he loved, for the weight of carrying guilt that wasn't entirely his to bear but felt heavier than mountains. "I can't lose you both," he sobbed, his strong frame shaking with the force of emotions he'd kept locked away too long. "I can't survive it again. I barely survived losing Jamie." "You won't have to," Sarah whispered fiercely, holding him as he broke apart and started to heal. "We're fighting this together, remember? All 3 of us. And we're going to win because love is stronger than manipulation, truth is stronger than lies, and family is stronger than money." The custody hearing took place on a gray Monday morning that seemed to match the gravity of what was at stake. The courthouse was surrounded by media vans, protesters holding signs that read, "Money can't buy love" and "Justice for Tommy," and curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle of wealth and scandal colliding in public. Logan and Sarah pushed through the crowd with Catherine Reynolds flanking them like a shield, their faces set with grim determination and the kind of resolve that came from having nothing left to lose. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense and formal, with high ceilings and polished wood that was supposed to inspire confidence in the system, but mostly just felt intimidating. Daniel Morrison sat with his legal team, looking confident and prepared in an expensive suit, his fiancée beside him playing the role of concerned future stepmother. Behind him, in the gallery, Richard Matthews watched with cold satisfaction and the predatory patience of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. This was his masterpiece. Destroy Logan's happiness so completely and publicly that he'd have no choice but to return to the family fold, broken and obedient and grateful for forgiveness. But Logan had one final card to play, a revelation that would change everything and expose the true nature of the forces arrayed against them. "Your Honor," Catherine said when called to present their case. "Before we begin, my clients would like to present new evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this case and exposes the fraud that's been perpetrated on this court." She handed a folder to Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on putting children's welfare above all other considerations, and who had no patience for games or manipulation in her courtroom. The judge reviewed the contents with growing surprise and displeasure, her expression darkening as she read. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Morrison said finally, her voice sharp with judicial authority, "is it true that you are not the biological father of the child in question?" Daniel's confident facade cracked like ice under pressure, his carefully rehearsed answers suddenly useless. "Your Honor, biology isn't everything. I've been a father figure to Tommy. According to these DNA test results that you commissioned yourself, you've never even met the child. You're seeking custody of a boy you've never seen, never supported, never shown any interest in, based on a paternal relationship that you've known for months doesn't exist. The judge's voice was sharp with disapproval and growing anger. Furthermore, these financial records show that your legal fees are being paid by parties with a clear conflict of interest in this case. This appears to be harassment and manipulation rather than a legitimate custody petition. But Richard Matthews wasn't finished with his perfectly orchestrated plan. He stood up in the gallery, his voice carrying the authority of decades in boardrooms and political backrooms, the confidence of someone who'd never lost a battle that mattered to him. Your Honor, if I may speak? Mr. Matthews, you're not a party to this case. Actually, I am. You see, Tommy Bennett is my grandson. The courtroom erupted in gasps, murmurs, and the sound of reporters frantically scribbling notes. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Logan went rigid with shock, and even Catherine looked stunned by the revelation and its timing. My godson, Marcus Sterling, is the child's biological father, Richard continued smoothly, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. He was young and irresponsible at the time, but he's ready to accept his responsibilities now. I'm petitioning for emergency custody on behalf of the Sterling family, who can provide the boy with advantages and opportunities far beyond what his current situation offers. It was the perfect trap, sprung at the perfect moment with perfect timing. Richard had waited until the last possible second to reveal the truth, giving Logan's team no time to prepare a defense or counter-strategy. Marcus Sterling stepped forward from the back of the courtroom, a clean-cut young man in an expensive suit, flanked by his own team of high-powered lawyers. Your Honor, Marcus said with practiced sincerity and the kind of polish that money could buy, I've spent the last year getting my life together, overcoming the addiction issues that made me irresponsible in my youth, preparing to be the father Tommy deserves. I can provide him with the best education money can buy, unlimited health care, and opportunities that will set him up for life. A trust fund worth $10 million is already established for his future. Logan looked at Sarah, seeing his own desperation reflected in her eyes. They were losing everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built together, because of Richard's machinations and Marcus Sterling's convenient redemption narrative. But Sarah Bennett had survived too much to give up without a fight. Sarah stood up slowly, her voice cutting through the courtroom chatter like a blade through silk. Every eye in the room turned to her. The young woman in the simple dress who'd been portrayed as everything from a gold digger to an unfit mother, now facing down some of the most powerful people in New York. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Morrison nodded, intrigued by the quiet dignity of this woman who'd been the center of so much legal and media attention. I've heard a lot of people talk about what's best for my son today, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands and the weight of everyone's stares. Mr. Morrison, who abandoned me when I was pregnant and has never met Tommy. Mr. Sterling, who left money on a nightstand after using me and disappeared for 2 years without a word. Mr. Matthews, who's using my child as a weapon against his own son in some twisted family power struggle. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word, fed by 2 years of suppressed anger and the fierce protectiveness that lived in every mother's heart. But nobody's asked Tommy what he wants. Nobody's looked at what he actually needs. Not money, not private schools, not a trust fund or social connections. He needs love. He needs stability. He needs parents who will be there at 3 a.m. when he's sick with nightmares, who will read him bedtime stories every single night, who will love him not because he's useful to them, but because he's theirs. She turned to face Marcus Sterling directly, her eyes blazing with righteous fury that made him step back involuntarily. You say you're ready to be a father? Where were you when Tommy had pneumonia and almost died because I couldn't afford proper medical care? Where were you when I worked 3 jobs to afford his formula and diapers? Where were you for his first word, his first step, his first smile? Where were you when he cried for hours with colic and I had no one to help me? Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his prepared speech crumbling under the weight of her accusations and the obvious truth they contained. Logan Matthews has been there for all of it, Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. He's the man who held Tommy when he was sick, who taught him to clap his hands and play peekaboo, who rocks him to sleep every night singing silly songs. He's the man Tommy calls the, not because we told him to, not because we coached him, but because that's who Logan is to him. Sarah's voice broke slightly, but she pushed forward with the determination that had carried her through foster care, teenage pregnancy, and every other obstacle life had thrown at her. I know I don't have money or connections or family names that open doors and impress people. But I have love. We have love. And that's worth more than all the trust funds and social advantages in the world. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of her heartbeat echoing in her ears and the faint traffic noise from outside. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, caught up in the raw emotion of a mother fighting for her child with nothing but truth and love as weapons. Judge Morrison looked around the room slowly, at Daniel Morrison, whose lies had been exposed, at Marcus Sterling, whose guilt was written across his handsome features, at Richard Matthews, whose manipulation had been laid bare for everyone to see, and finally at Logan and Sarah, holding hands and holding their breath while their future hung in the balance. I've been a family court judge for 20 years, she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every possible permutation of human greed, love, and desperation. I've seen children used as pawns, as weapons, as property to be divided up between warring adults who care more about winning than what's actually best for the child in question. She looked directly at Tommy, who was sitting peacefully in Sarah's lap, playing with Logan's tie and completely unaware that his entire future was being decided by the adults around him. But I've also seen real families. Families that aren't defined by blood or money or social status, but by love, commitment, and the daily choice to put a child's welfare above everything else. This child has been through enough upheaval in his short life. He deserves stability, consistency, and parents who put his needs above their own agendas, their own guilt, and their own family power struggles. The judge's gavel came down with finality that echoed through the room like thunder. Custody remains with Sarah Matthews, with full parental rights extended to her husband, Logan Matthews. All other claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering restraining orders against both Mr. Morrison and Mr. Sterling, prohibiting any contact with the child or his family for a period of 2 years. She looked directly at Richard Matthews, her expression stern and unforgiving. And if this court sees any evidence of further harassment, manipulation, or interference with this family's peace, I will hold the responsible parties in contempt, regardless of their social standing, financial resources, or family connections. This child's welfare is not a game to be played for adult entertainment. Richard Matthews left the courthouse without a word, his empire of manipulation crumbling around him like a house built on sand. His carefully orchestrated plan had backfired spectacularly, exposing his methods to public scrutiny and legal consequences while strengthening the very relationship he'd tried to destroy. Daniel Morrison slipped out through a side door, his brief moment in the spotlight over, already planning his next scheme to extract money from wealthy families with secrets to hide. Marcus Sterling lingered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something to Sarah, but Logan's protective stance and the court's restraining order made it clear that any conversation would be unwelcome and illegal. Outside the courthouse, Logan, Sarah, and Tommy were surrounded by reporters shouting questions about their victory, their relationship, their plans for the future. But they pushed through to their waiting car without comment, having said everything that mattered inside that courtroom. Their priority now was getting home to begin their new life as a legally recognized family. That evening, in the quiet sanctuary of their apartment, Logan sat on the floor with Tommy, building towers of blocks just to watch the toddler knock them down with delighted laughter. Sarah curled up on the couch, watching the two most important people in her life and feeling a peace she'd never known before. The security that came from knowing their family was real, legal, and protected. No regrets? Logan asked, glancing up at her with eyes still shadowed by the day's emotional toll. About what? About marrying me under these circumstances. About getting caught up in my family's drama and manipulation. About having your life turned upside down by someone else's power games. Sarah slid down to the floor beside them, taking Logan's hand and watching Tommy carefully stack 2 blocks before gleefully knocking them over again. I didn't marry you because of the circumstances, she said firmly. I married you because you're the man who saw a desperate mother and a sick child and decided to help. No questions asked. I married you because you love Tommy like he's your own blood. I married you because you make me believe in happy endings again. Logan leaned over to kiss her, soft and sweet, while Tommy clapped his hands and babbled happily in his own private language that somehow made perfect sense to both of them. Besides, Sarah added with a grin that lit up her entire face, someone's got to keep you from being too serious all the time. Logan laughed, the first truly carefree laugh he'd had in years, free from guilt and grief and the weight of other people's expectations. I love you, Mrs. Matthews. I love you too, Mr. Matthews. Tommy, deciding he wasn't getting enough attention, crawled into Logan's lap and patted his face with sticky fingers. Dad, he said clearly, and Logan's heart swelled with a joy he'd thought he'd never feel again. 6 months after the custody hearing, Logan Matthews stood at the window of his new office, smaller than his old one but in a building he owned outright, free from his father's influence and the weight of family expectations. Matthews Family Pharmaceuticals had become the most trusted name in affordable medication, with free clinics in low-income neighborhoods across New York and expansion plans for other major cities. The company's mission statement, framed on his wall, was simple: healthcare is a human right, not a luxury good. It was a direct rebuke to everything his father's empire represented, and it felt like the first honest work Logan had ever done. Sarah had returned to school, studying business management at NYU with plans to help Logan expand their charitable programs. The scholarship Logan had quietly established in her name covered all expenses, though she'd insisted on maintaining her part-time job at Giuseppe's restaurant, partly for the extra income, but mostly because the old man had become the closest thing to a father she'd ever known. Tommy, now 2.5 years old and talking in complete sentences that often surprised adults with their complexity, spent his days in the company daycare Logan had built on the ground floor of their building. The facility served not only their employees but also working mothers from the surrounding community who couldn't afford traditional childcare. The custody battle had changed them all in fundamental ways. Logan had learned that real strength came not from wealth or power, but from the courage to love despite the risk of loss. He'd discovered that healing from trauma didn't mean forgetting or moving on, but rather transforming pain into purpose and using his privileges to help others avoid the suffering he'd experienced. Sarah had found that trust, once broken, could indeed be rebuilt stronger than before. The foster care system had taught her that people left, that love was conditional, that security was an illusion maintained by those who'd never truly been vulnerable. But Logan had shown her that some people stayed, that love could be unconditional, and that security came not from having no vulnerabilities but from having someone who would protect those vulnerabilities. Tommy had given them both the gift of seeing the world through innocent eyes, eyes that didn't distinguish between biological fathers and chosen fathers, that measured love in bedtime stories and piggyback rides rather than bank accounts and social status. Richard Matthews made one final attempt to regain control over his son's life, appearing at Logan's office on a gray December morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had first walked into the pharmacy with a sick child and changed everything. "You've made your point," Richard said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Logan's desk like he owned the place and everything in it. The rebellion, the charity work, the marriage to that girl. I understand you needed to work through your guilt about the accident. But enough is enough. It's time to come home and fulfill your responsibilities to this family. Logan didn't look up from the grant proposal he was reviewing for a new clinic in the Bronx, a facility that would serve families just like Sarah's used to be. I am home. This isn't a home, it's a hobby. You're wasting your potential, your education, your birthright on people who will never appreciate the sacrifices you're making for them. Richard's voice carried the same authoritative tone that had cowed Logan as a child. They'll use you up and move on to the next benefactor when someone with deeper pockets comes along. Like you never appreciated what Mom sacrificed for your ambitions? Logan's voice was deadly quiet, each word precisely chosen for maximum impact. Like you never appreciated Emma's sacrifice when she gave up her art career to marry the man you chose for her? Like you've never appreciated anything that didn't directly serve your need for control and power. Richard's face darkened with the kind of anger he usually reserved for business rivals and political opponents. Your mother and sister understood family loyalty. They understood that individual desires must sometimes be subordinated to the greater good of the family legacy, the empire we've built over generations. The greater good? Logan finally looked up, his gray eyes cold as winter steel. You mean your ego. Your need to control everything and everyone around you, to treat your own children like chess pieces in some elaborate game that only you understand the rules to. I built an empire, Richard said, his voice rising with the passion of someone defending their life's work. I created opportunities, jobs, medical breakthroughs that have saved countless lives. Everything I did was for this family, for future generations of Matthews' children who will inherit something meaningful. You built a prison, Logan replied, standing and moving to the window that overlooked the small playground where Tommy was laughing on a swing while Sarah pushed him higher and higher. And I'm not serving a life sentence in it. Not for you, not for some abstract legacy that's built on the misery of people who can't afford healthcare. Richard followed his gaze and saw Sarah and Tommy below, his expression softening slightly, not with warmth, but with the calculating assessment of weakness and leverage. She's lovely, he said carefully, his tone shifting to something that might have been mistaken for genuine concern. And the boy seems healthy and happy. I can see why you're attached to them. But attachment and building a life are different things, Logan. What happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize you've tied yourself to someone with no understanding of your world, your responsibilities, your true potential. What happens, Logan said, turning back to face his father with absolute certainty, is that I'll still wake up every morning grateful that I chose love over legacy, family over empire, and happiness over your approval. Richard stood slowly, his composure finally cracking after decades of perfect control. You're throwing away everything I've built. Everything your grandfather built before me. Generations of Matthew's achievement and influence, squandered on sentiment and self-indulgence. No, Logan said firmly, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd finally found his true purpose. I'm building something better. Something based on helping people instead of using them, on creating opportunities instead of hoarding them, on love instead of control and manipulation. Richard moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. When this fantasy falls apart, and it will, because fairy tales don't survive in the real world, don't come crawling back expecting forgiveness or inheritance. I won't enable your self-destruction any longer. I won't need to come back, Logan said quietly, his voice filled with the peace that came from finally understanding his own worth. Because I finally understand what you never did. The only legacy that matters isn't what you leave behind in bank accounts and corporate holdings. It's what you build while you're here. And I'm building something beautiful. After his father left, Logan remained at the window, watching Sarah teach Tommy how to go down the slide by himself. The little boy hesitated at the top, looking scared of the height and the speed, but Sarah's encouraging words and Logan's wave from the window gave him the courage to let go and experience the joy of flight. It was a perfect metaphor for their entire journey, learning to let go of fear and trust in love's ability to catch you when you fall. Marcus Sterling appeared at their apartment door on a Sunday morning in spring, 2 years after the custody hearing that had changed all their lives. He looked older, more serious, carrying the weight of genuine remorse rather than the practiced contrition he displayed in court. Sarah opened the door cautiously, Logan immediately moving to stand beside her in a protective stance while Tommy played with trucks in the living room behind them, his happy chatter providing a soundtrack of innocence to an adult conversation fraught with complicated history. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," Marcus said quietly, his voice lacking the smooth confidence that had once made him so appealing to a 19-year-old girl at a wedding. "The restraining order expired last month, but I wanted to respect your space. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the court-ordered performance art from before." "You have 2 minutes," Logan said, his voice steel wrapped in silk, every protective instinct on high alert. Marcus nodded, accepting the limitation without argument. "I was a coward 2 years ago in that courtroom, and I was an even bigger coward that night at my brother's wedding. I was drunk, entitled, and I treated you like you didn't matter, like you were just entertainment for the evening." He looked directly at Sarah, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "But you did matter. You were kind and funny and real in a room full of fake people putting on performances, and I should have recognized that. I should have been better." "What do you want, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but wary, years of experience teaching her to be suspicious of wealthy men bearing apologies. "I want to set up a trust fund for Tommy. Not because I think money fixes anything or gives me any rights, but because every child deserves financial security and opportunities. No strings attached, no contact required, no involvement in his life unless you specifically request it. Just protection for his future." Logan started to object, the offer feeling too much like manipulation disguised as generosity, but Sarah held up a hand to stop him. "Why now?" she asked, studying Marcus's face for signs of deception or hidden agendas. Marcus smiled sadly, and for the first time he looked genuinely vulnerable rather than polished. "Because I spent 2 years in therapy learning to be honest about my failures instead of running from them or making excuses. Because I have a daughter now, Emma, she's 6 months old, and I can't imagine someone treating her the way I treated you. Because I want to do one thing right in this whole mess, even if it's too little and too late." "We don't need your money," Logan said firmly, his protective instincts still on high alert. "I know you don't. You've built something beautiful together, something that has nothing to do with bank accounts or trust funds. That's exactly why I want to give it." Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket with careful, deliberate movements. "The paperwork is all drawn up by independent lawyers with no connection to my family or your father, Logan. $2 million in a trust that Tommy can access when he turns 18 for education, starting a business, buying a home, whatever he chooses. Sarah and Logan retain all parental rights and decision-making authority. I just want to know that if anything ever happens to you both, he'll have options and security." Sarah looked at Logan, seeing her own conflicted feelings reflected in his expression. They didn't need Marcus Sterling's money, and accepting it felt somehow like validating his abandonment and betrayal. But Tommy might benefit from it someday, and more importantly, it felt like a genuine attempt at making amends rather than an attempt to buy his way into their lives. "We'll have our lawyer review it," Sarah said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "If it's really no strings attached and no hidden clauses, we'll consider it for Tommy's sake." Marcus nodded, relief evident on his face as he set the envelope on the small table by their door. "Thank you. That's all I can ask for, and more than I deserve." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to speak truth regardless of the consequences. "Marcus." He stopped, looking back with something like hope in his eyes. Be a better father to your daughter than you were ready to be to mine. She deserves that, and so do you. I will, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. I am. Every single day. 5 years after that first desperate night in the pharmacy, Sarah graduated summa cum laude from NYU's business school. Logan and Tommy sat in the front row of the university auditorium, cheering louder than anyone else as she crossed the stage to receive her diploma, her face glowing with the kind of pride that came from achieving something through pure determination and hard work. The Matthews Foundation now operated 17 free clinics across the Northeast, providing healthcare and medication to families who couldn't afford traditional medical care. Sarah served as the foundation's executive director, bringing the perspective of someone who'd lived the problems they were trying to solve and understood the dignity that had to be preserved even when providing help. Tommy, now 7 years old and brilliant beyond his years, had no memory of the custody battle that had nearly torn their family apart. To him, Logan had always been Dad, Sarah had always been his hero, and their love had always been the unshakable foundation of his world. He was thriving in school, showing an early aptitude for science that made Logan beam with pride, and had the kind of confidence that came from never doubting that he was loved unconditionally. They lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn now, close to Giuseppe's restaurant and the community that had embraced them from the beginning. It was large enough for the family they were building. Sarah was 6 months pregnant with their daughter, whom they'd already decided to name Emma in honor of Logan's sister, who'd finally reconciled with them after seeing how happy Logan was, but not so large that they lost touch with their roots and the struggles that had brought them together. On quiet evenings, when Tommy was asleep and Sarah was grading business plan proposals from her graduate students at the community college where she taught part-time, Logan would sometimes think about the night that changed everything. The desperation in Sarah's eyes, the fever burning through Tommy's small body, the choice to help without question or condition that had seemed so simple at the time but had changed the entire trajectory of his life. He'd saved them that night, but they'd saved him too, from a life of hollow success built on other people's suffering, from the weight of guilt that had nearly destroyed him, from the loneliness of wealth without purpose or genuine connection. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked one such evening, settling beside him on the couch with her hands resting on her growing belly, feeling their daughter move restlessly as if sensing her parents' contentment. "The night we met," Logan replied, pulling her closer and marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. "How different our lives would be if I hadn't been at the pharmacy that night, if I'd made a different choice." "You would have been somewhere else helping someone else," Sarah said with absolute certainty, her voice carrying the conviction that came from truly knowing someone's character. "That's who you are, Logan. That's who you've always been, even when you couldn't see it yourself. What about you? Any regrets about the path that led you to me? All the hard things, all the struggles." Sarah considered the question seriously, thinking about the foster homes and the loneliness, the struggle to survive as a teenage mother, the humiliation and fear that had been her constant companions for so many years. But all of it had been necessary to bring her to that pharmacy on that December night, to the moment when their lives had intersected and everything had changed. "No regrets," she said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "Every hard thing, every scary moment, every time I wanted to give up and couldn't because of Tommy, it all led me to you and this life we've built together. I wouldn't change any of it." Tommy appeared in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes and looking younger than his 7 years. "I had a bad dream," he said, his voice small and uncertain in the way that children's voices became when they needed comfort. Logan opened his arms without hesitation, and Tommy climbed onto the couch between his parents, snuggling into the warmth and safety of their embrace. Within minutes, he was asleep again, secure in the knowledge that his parents would protect him from anything that threatened his peace, that their love was strong enough to hold back all the darkness in the world. "This is what happiness looks like," Sarah whispered, watching Logan's face as he gazed down at their son with an expression of pure contentment. "This is what love builds," Logan replied, his hand covering hers on her pregnant belly where their daughter was settling into sleep as well. "Not empires or legacies or monuments to ego. Just this, a family that chooses each other every day, that fights for each other, that builds something beautiful together." Outside, snow began to fall on Brooklyn, covering the streets in pristine white that would be dirty and gray by morning but was perfect and beautiful in this moment. Inside, a family that had been broken and scattered had found each other, proving that the best stories don't end with happily ever after. They continue with, and they chose to love each other every day after that. As they sat together in the lamplight, Tommy sleeping peacefully between them, and their daughter moving gently in Sarah's womb, Logan and Sarah knew they had built something that would last. Not because it was perfect. They still had arguments, still faced challenges, still struggled with the ordinary difficulties that every family encountered. But because it was real, built on a foundation of genuine love, mutual respect, and the daily choice to be better people for each other. Love, they had learned, wasn't a fairy tale ending that solved all problems and eliminated all struggles. It was a daily choice, a commitment renewed with every sunrise, a promise kept through every challenge and celebration. And in a world that often seemed determined to tear families apart, they had chosen to build something beautiful, something lasting, something that would grow stronger and deeper with each passing year. Their story wasn't ending as Tommy stirred in his sleep and reached for both his parents' hands with the unconscious trust that they would always be there to hold him. It was evolving, deepening, becoming richer with each chapter they wrote together as a family. And as Logan and Sarah looked at their son and felt their daughter moving beneath Sarah's hand, they knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. The end. We encourage you to like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video. Please share your thoughts in the comments section and explore our channel for a diverse range of content, including audiobooks, murder mysteries, psychological thrillers, and classic novels. We strive to provide comprehensive and engaging storytelling experiences. Your visit is highly appreciated, and we are confident you will find content to your liking.